Salvete discipulaque. Our next reading comes from Virgil's Aeneid, from Book 2. The Aeneid is one of the truly great works of world literature.
The finest, most enduring, timeless works of art all seem to have two things in common. They capture and present universal themes in a way that reaches beyond their time and place, but they are rooted deeply enough in concrete people, things, and experiences that we can identify with them on a personal level. Such is Virgil's Aeneid. It is a literary epic written for an ancient Roman state struggling to find unity after a century of civil bloodshed, but it has also continued to find an audience through all the changes of the last 2 millennia. It has influenced and inspired countless people through the centuries, including the philosopher and theologian St. Augustine in the 4th to 5th century AD, the great Italian poet Dante in the 13th century, the English composer Henry Purcell in the 17th century, whose opera Dido and Aeneas is playing in the background, by the way, the American poet Robert Lowell from the 20th century, and many others. Virgil's poetic narrative recounts the escape to Italy of the Trojan prince Aeneas and fellow refugees from the fall of the city Troy. Once there in Italy, they merge with the Latin people who lived there to create the Roman nation. They experience many dangerous adventures along the way, often inspired by the much-loved and already ancient epics of the Greek poet Homer. They also encountered numerous other peoples along the way, including the Carthaginians and their queen Dido in North Africa. This mythologized meeting foreshadows the deadly rivalry that would arise between Rome and Carthage in historical times. In historical times, Rome fought 3 wars with Carthage, the first starting in 264 BC, the third ending with the final defeat and utter destruction of Carthage more than a century later in 146 BC. The darkest hours for Rome were during the Second Punic War, when the Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca invaded Italy and spent 17 years crushing one Roman army after another and threatening to capture the city itself. Just 13 years after the final defeat of Carthage in the Third Punic War, when the city was leveled and its fields sown with salt so that nothing could grow there, the Romans initiated a long era of fratricide that would destroy their 400-year-old republic, beginning with the murder of reforming legislator Tiberius Gracchus in 133 BC. 12 years later, his brother Gaius would also be murdered. Over the next century, Rome experienced a long and debilitating series of riots, disturbances, and civil wars. During this time, Rome's old republican institutions were often overridden by powerful generals who used their armies, and often mass murder, to impose their will on the state. Marius at the end of the 2nd century BC and the beginning of the 1st. Sulla in the 80s BC. Pompey the Great and Julius Caesar in the middle of the 1st century BC. After Julius Caesar defeated Pompey in yet another civil war in 48 BC, he stood as the last of these dictators until he himself was murdered in 44 BC. Caesar's heir, his great-nephew, the 18-year-old Octavian, joined forces with Mark Antony, one of the murdered dictator's leading officers, to defeat an army led by Caesar's assassins, Brutus and Cassius, at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC. This victory, however, was not the end of Rome's civil strife. Octavian waged a final civil war against Antony, who had allied himself with the Egyptian queen Cleopatra. Antony and Cleopatra took their own lives after Octavian's general Agrippa defeated them in a naval battle at Actium, 102 years after the death of Tiberius Gracchus.
So at this point, Octavian was the last man standing. He claimed that he was surrendering his monarchical powers and restoring the Republic. All he asked was to be called by the title princeps, first citizen. But in fact, he still ruled Rome with monarchical power from behind the scenes. A grateful Senate did confer on him one other title, in addition to princeps. In 27 BC, the Senate gave him the title Augustus, which means highly respected one. Under this title, he is known to history as the first Roman emperor.
While he might not have been serious about restoring true republican self-governance to the Roman people, Augustus did truly wish to restore a sense of nationhood, so that Romans would live peacefully and work productively together once again. As one part of this program, he enlisted artists such as the poets Virgil, Horace, Propertius, and Tibullus to help encourage the idea of Romanitas, Roman nationhood. When Virgil offered to write an epic poem about Augustus and his accomplishments as part of this program of renewal, the emperor himself proposed a better idea. The protagonist of the epic would instead be the mythical hero Aeneas, a Trojan prince whom the Romans honored as the first father of their nation. And this way the first citizen could still retain some semblance of republican modesty, but at the same time, the parallels between the first founding of the Roman people from the ruins of Troy and the refounding of a reunited Roman state under Augustus would be sufficiently clear. Augustus no doubt hoped that Virgil's poem would provide the sort of cultural cohesion for the Romans that Homer's great epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, did for the Greeks. Virgil very consciously invokes both of Homer's poems. The first half of the Aeneid, books 1 to 6, in which Aeneas and his companions are homeless wanderers, evokes the wanderings of Odysseus in the Odyssey. The struggle of the Trojans to establish themselves in Italy in books 7 to 12 is reminiscent of the combat that dominates the Iliad, which takes place in the midst of the fighting at Troy. More specifically, the rivalry of Aeneas and the Italian leader Turnus recreates the mortal feud between the Greek hero Achilles and the Trojan Hector in Homer's epic. Virgil also follows Homer in starting his story in medias res, in the middle of things, at some intermediate point in the story. The Aeneid opens with the jealous goddess Juno angrily eyeing the Trojan fleet as they depart from the island of Sicily on the last leg of their journey to Italy, where they are to found the new Troy. Intent on stopping them, and also helping her favorite, Carthage, Juno bribes the wind god Aeolus to raise an enormous storm which scatters the fleet of Aeneas to the coast of North Africa. Here, the Trojans meet another group of exiles, Phoenicians from Tyre, who, with their queen Dido, are building the city of Carthage. The Carthaginians, who have heard all about the Trojan War, who hasn't, warmly welcome Aeneas and his followers, and hold a banquet in their honor. Book 1 of the Aeneid ends at this feast. The last thing we see is Dido saying to Aeneas, "Imo age, et a prima dic, aspes, origine nobis." Come now, guest, tell us from the first beginning. That is, tell us from the first beginning the whole story of Troy and its fall.
And so Aeneas begins to tell his tale at the beginning of Book 2, although it is, as he says, infandum dolorem, unspeakable grief to begin. At the point he starts his tale, the Greeks seem to have left and sailed away home, but in fact, they're really hiding with their fleet behind the island of Tenedos, just off the coast. The relieved inhabitants of Troy come out of the city to look at the former battlefield, where they find a curious object, a very large wooden horse, which appears to have been left behind by their departing enemy as an offering to the gods for a safe passage back to Greece. This is where we pick up the story.